Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Thomas Wooden Railway and today we are taking a trip back in time to the grand old year of 1992 and we are going to take a look at the unofficial yearbook or pamphlet for something called the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Wooden Railway System. It is the train system with personalities. So nowadays we all know this as, the Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise line or the Thomas and Friends line. Something like that. But back in the day when this was first introduced over 30 years ago, some things about the line were a little different. It was just sort of a brand new toy on the market for a TV show that was entering into the American marketplace in the early 1990s. And before Thomas Wooden Railway came out, the main toy of choice for Thomas the Tank Engine fans was Ertl. They were die-cast metal toys, basically a predecessor to Take Along and Take and Play and Adventures, and then I guess Push Along now. But the point was that they were, metal die-cast bodies, and they were definitely quality toys. But I think there was also an emphasis to kind of branch out into other merchandise lines and basically give parents and kids an alternative to how they wanted to play with Thomas. So in came the Thomas Wooden Railway System. It was invented by a couple of people in the United States, one of them being, you've probably heard of a guy named Roy Wilson. He was instrumental in that. But this is a pamphlet from like the very first year or so that Wooden Railway was on the market, and it's relatively short. I struggle to call it a yearbook because it has some yearbook qualities, but it's just so short that it's like, later yearbooks, for example, if I bring in a yearbook from roughly 10 years later, look at the size of this thing. Just an incredible amount of information at your disposal. Very, very thick. And again, this was when the line was well established. And this, for the most part, the line was just getting its feet under itself. And so there wasn't that much to talk about. For those who don't have this pamphlet, I do want to make point of the size difference. We're all maybe used to this size of yearbook. Maybe if you don't have a Thomas Wooden Railway yearbook, maybe that's new information to you. But all of the yearbooks, past a certain point, were the same size. But this pamphlet is a tiny bit smaller and obviously a little less thicker, just so you know. So the point of this video is I want to walk through this pamphlet and just kind of talk about the things I'm seeing, a lot of the words here, and overall just kind of review how this new merchandise line is being presented, and honestly, if it's doing a good job of selling parents and kids on this brand new toy. It is fascinating to look at this pamphlet nowadays, to think that it's 30 years old, and some things have stayed the same, but then at the same time a lot of things have changed as well. So this is the front of the pamphlet right here. This is the classic Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends logo. And what I always forget, at this time when Thomas Wooden Railway was making its debut, the TV series was just coming to America, but in 1992, there had already been 3 seasons of the Thomas and Friends TV series. In fact, season 4 was probably in pre-production or production by the time this was going on. When I look at a lot of the character models, I immediately think like, oh wow, these are from 1984 or 1986, seasons 1 and 2. That's not really the case. These characters, had been on TV for a while now. And so it's just kind of funny with that information in mind, just kind of assessing how everything is presented here. So a couple of the reoccurring things we are going to see throughout this pamphlet, it's called the Wooden Railway System with Personality. I think that's an interesting word. I get what they're going for because wooden railway train systems were not new by any means. I always think of Brio having made toys like this for years before Thomas Wooden Railway was invented. But basically, Thomas Wooden Railway was the new kid on the block, and you're kind of coming into a pre-established merchandise range, and it's like, well, how is your toy different? How is this not just a clone of Brio or whatever else is out there? So they're really pushing this idea of like, hey, the trains have faces is really what it comes down to. They have personalities, they're characters. Think of all of the stories and fun and playtime you can create with that in mind. Personally, I find the word personality to be a little interesting. I think maybe like if I had written this nowadays, I would call it the wooden railway system with character. To me, that feels a little bit more natural because, I mean, these are characters. Like, you don't call them engines. Like, who else are all of Thomas's friends? Like, it's a character lineup. Think of character cards that you would get with Thomas Wooden Railway back in the day. So I'm not really sure why they didn't choose the word character there. Maybe there was maybe some other wooden railway system was using I don't know. Maybe the word personality was being pushed across Thomas as a whole at the time. But personality, in my opinion, it's not a bad word. But to me, character is a lot more stronger. Somebody's character doesn't really change. If somebody has a strong character, they are steadfast and, nothing really shakes them. Personality, I'd say, is definitely a synonym of character, but I think you open up the door for, somebody's personality can change. I think if something happens or, they go through a tough time, maybe their personality does change, but the word character, somebody's character, usually doesn't change. So anyway, I'm going really into it, but I also think that, personality is associated with persons or people, and these are trains, and although they have characteristics or personalities related to people, I don't know, I just find the word personality to be a bit interesting there. Another thing that was pushed at the time was that how this merchandise range was for people, for Thomas's friends, ages 2 to 102, and obviously a little tongue-in-cheek there. But I also think that, they were basically saying, yeah, this toy system really is for everyone. I think as someone who's a lot older than 2, like as someone who's continued to look at this stuff over the years, like I definitely appreciate them saying that, but I also don't think it's meant to be taken super seriously. It's literally just like, hey, you start out with this toy as a young kid and it can grow with you. I think honestly the bigger takeaway here is that they do say that, kids under the age of 2 probably shouldn't play with these toys. Not that there are a bunch of like super small pieces, but kids at that age tend to put a lot of things in their mouths. And again, like I think of some of the smaller pieces I'm seeing here is like the roof on Ellsbridge, or maybe one of the signs. Again, I think that's just a fun little way of saying like, ages 2 and up. That's really what they changed this to at later dates. But if I ever live to be 103 and I can no longer play with Thomas Wooden Railway, that'll be a sad day, but we'll cross that bridge if I ever get there. There's another little tagline here. Now with more characters and accessories for more fun than ever. I think that's kind of a weird sentence because this is the beginning of the merchandise line. So this blurb kind of emphasizes it's been around for a while, which is maybe what they're trying to go for. I think they are trying to maybe convince you that, oh yeah, we're established. We've been around the block. In reality, this is the very first year of the toy range. I absolutely love this promo image on the front here. I think it's very well done. There's so much eye candy to look at, especially on the play table here. So back in the day, aka a few years ago, we used to call this the 100-piece set, but apparently nowadays, I guess it technically has 109 pieces. This is the set I'm talking about. And I actually did a video on this set many years ago. I was fortunate enough to find like a mint condition version of this. I guess they call it the Island of Sodor playboard set now, but it's like the 109-piece set. I was super fortunate to find a version of this on Craigslist. I put it together. I made a video about it, and I took some pictures. And I think, this promo image is definitely hyped up a little bit. There's a ton of engines on the tracks. There's so many accessories. Just look at the amount of trees everywhere, all of the figures and the trains and the non-rail vehicles. This playboard is just packed to the brim with characters. It really is like the perfect utopian version of a Thomas Wooden Railway, collection at the time. Looking on the back here, I think this set did come with some engines, but interestingly enough, on the promo picture, they don't have any engines on the track, but that is a more realistic version of what that set looked like. Still impressive. Tons of trees, tons of track, lots of buildings, but the one on the front here, it's just a sensory overload when it comes to Thomas Wooden Railway products. But yeah, I love this picture. What's really funny, though, is that in later years, when Yearbook started to become more of a thing and we were showing off, the sets and the layouts. They were kind of presented in this landscape horizontal, like 16:9 aspect ratio in a rectangle. And this is definitely presented in a more square or vertical format. And I think that's done just because the set looks a lot better from the front. I mean, it's hard to call this the front because it's a play table. You can walk all the way around. There's really no wrong way to view the set. But the set, does look super impressive. I think it helps that the sheds are facing you and the engines are facing you most of the time and all of that. But I just find that interesting because this is actually a more usual angle that we are used to versus this. But I love this set. I love the overload of Thomas characters. There's some really cool pre-production characters here. I always wondered what Sir Topham Hatt is standing on. That looks like we have like the water refilling tank there. And that looks like the top piece to that, but just painted black. It could just be a barrel as well, but I don't think that was ever officially a product. The Elsbridge platform looks a little bit different. I don't think that's the very first version of Terrence we ever got. Some of the signs are different. Obviously, one of the major characters that went through some changes was Toby in the back. But, there's, like I said, there's just a lot of pre-production images, and even the board that this is photographed on looks a little different. In fact, the board right here is the playboard that I grew up with, and I'm pretty sure, for example, I see the little island that the windmill is on. Well, that is that right there. So, this board went through a couple of changes over the years, but what's really interesting is the road is like this black asphalt or tarmac. And I mean, that's not what roads don't look like or anything. I mean, they definitely do. But in later releases, the roads are more gray and they added like some hashed stripes down the middle to kind of, make it look more like a road. My unofficial theory, though, is that you can kind of see this bottom area where it's like there's a pullover lane on the road or something like that. And my unofficial theory is that maybe they were kind of implying, hey, if you wanted to spend the money and buy 2 of these playboards and actually flip the second one around, they could technically connect through there. Again, I don't think they ever pushed that theory at all, but I do find that very interesting that basically at the bottom here, it opens up. And again, we're not seeing the very bottom of the play table, but I think we're pretty close to it. You can see the logo in the corner here that's usually in the bottom. So my unofficial theory is that maybe at one point they were thinking, hey, if you buy 2 of these tables, you can put them together. Think of like putting some Lego sets together that kind of complement each other. But anyway, the cover here is super, super impressive. It's such a joy to look at. And it's just fascinating. I mean, this is, for those who don't remember or weren't alive, this is what the 90s looked like. You'll see in a lot of the marketing images they've used, it's usually a group of children playing together. The parents are heavily involved. I definitely grew up playing with Thomas Wooden Railway mostly by myself because that's just how it was. But there's definitely, as you're going to see, an emphasis on community, socialization, sharing and caring, all of that. And I think this promo image on the front here does a really great job of that. So we open up to sort of like a character select screen, and I'll talk a little bit about the characters featured here. I think there are some interesting omissions and also some interesting inclusions, but let me read the top here to you. Now, the magical world of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends comes to children as a sturdy classic toy made in America. The wooden railway system with personality. So yeah, back in the day, a couple of things. The very first year or two of Thomas Wooden Railway, it was made in America. Back on the back cover here, Learning Curve's headquarters, or at least their office at the time, was located in Connecticut. And then I think once this toy line got its feet under itself and became popular and successful enough, then they kind of were like, okay, we have to move production overseas, because Wooden Railway has always been criticized for being expensive. And I could argue, you pay for what you get. They're quality toys that will last a lifetime. But if they had continued to make the items in America, I mean, the cost would have been much, much more. That's always kind of a pros and cons thing. You'd like stuff to be made where you live, but you have to pay people more to make them here and all of that. So the point I'm trying to make though, is that the very first run of toys with the staples on the bottom, they were made here in America, which is pretty crazy. Again, they're pushing this thing, the wooden railway system with personality. And again, they call it a system. that was definitely like the tagline, or what they I always call it a merchandise line, which I think is a lot more common, but they really called it the Wooden Railway System, which I think is interesting. The subheading reads, an exciting new product line for fine department and specialty stores. The Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Wooden Railway System will capture the hearts of parents who care about their children's development through play, as well as the millions of fans, young and old, of the award-winning series Shining Time Station on PBS. Wow. Really great line there. I think it does a great job. The toys are meant for kids, but honestly, you have to convince the parents to buy the toys in the first place. I mean, they're the ones with the money. So if you don't convince the parents to buy the toys, the kids are never going to get the toys. For example, the very first Thomas Wooden Railway item I ever received was the A Day at the Works set from the late 90s. And I had had no introduction to Thomas and Friends before that. In fact, in conjunction with that Wooden Railway set, I also received a Thomas Comes to Breakfast VHS, which had a bunch of stories on it. And my parents actually had to introduce me. I mean, I remember I got that set for Christmas, and my mom had to like walk me up to it and like explain like how it worked. Like, Thomas was included. So it was like, this is Thomas. Because I didn't know who Thomas was. So apparently, I'm not really sure how it happened, but my parents elected to buy me, my first Thomas Wooden Railway item, which was a set. And somewhere along the line before they did that, they were convinced that this was a good toy for their child. So I think this line about them, it's about, it will capture the hearts of parents who care about their children's development through play. I think that's a really good line. Because as a parent, you care about your child, you want to give them the best things, and they're kind of making the case that this is like a really nice item. And then the kids, once they're introduced to it, they'll fall in love with it. There is a line here about the show being on PBS as part of Shining Time Station. I didn't grow up with Shining Time Station. I came a little bit after that. Again, this is early 90s. But I remember watching Thomas and Friends on TV. It may have been reruns of Shining Time Station. I think there was also a spin-off, Mr. Conductor's Thomas Tales or something like that. But how I was introduced, or how I kept up with Thomas back in the day, was one, just buying the DVDs or the VHSs like at a store, or I would go to my library a lot, maybe like once a week, and they would have videos cycle through, and I would just pick up a new VHS and watch all of the stories on that VHS. That's how I kind of kept up with things as a kid. So to the characters here, we kind of have like our classics with some really high quality, pre-production images. This is what I was talking about. Toby looking a little funny. Toby's, a very rectangular, square character. But his features were a bit exaggerated in this first prototype version. He had a really round roof, for example, that was later toned down, and even like his cowcatcher and side plates look a little exaggerated as well. I bet there was, the bottom half of Toby and Mavis, I think, definitely shared the same components, which is probably why he looks like that. But again, we have we have like basically 16 characters here, and I think there are some interesting omissions. For example, Duck is not here, and Donald and Douglas aren't here, and that's really interesting because Donald and Douglas are actually featured on the cover in the sheds there. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe they just thought, okay, we'll give like a lineup of engines and then some rolling stock, and then, oh, look, Bill and Ben, they look the same, but they're different. They're twins. And then there's some non-rail characters and Harold and Terrence, but then there's no Bertie, for example, which is interesting. We get one piece of, classic rolling stock besides the coaches, the Troublesome Truck, or I guess Troublesome Trucks, technically. That's interesting. And then honestly, I think Mavis is a really interesting addition. Remember, this is being released in 1992, and season 3 of Thomas and Friends, I think, was 1990, 1991-ish. So I honestly think, Mavis is included as sort of like a newer character, quote unquote newer, as in like new just to the series. But I also think she's included for some diversity. It's no secret that, a lot of the main classic Thomas characters were guys, and then, females at the time, besides Daisy and Mavis, were mostly coaches. So I think Mavis is included there as sort of like, if you were keeping up with Thomas and Friends at the time, it's like, yeah, Mavis was just introduced. She was in the most recent season. But I really like this page, but considering all all of the items on the front here, I mean, they could have shrunk the pictures and included double what they have, but maybe they're just focusing on some heavy hitters here. So the next page, we kind of go into this sets area. There's 4 sets that they highlight, something as simple from a circle set to a bigger figure 8 here. And in terms of the layout of this page, it's kind of interesting, but like there's this subheading here that I thought you were supposed to read like top line all the way across, but you're actually supposed to read it in sections. So the heading is 4 complete instant systems. I guess it was trademarked. I guess that's what they wanted to call sets, were instant systems. These 4 complete instant systems bring the magical world of Thomas the Tank Engine to life. Because children learn and grow as they play, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Wooden Railway System is designed both to inspire their imaginations and to encourage the development of social, motor, and problem-solving skills. With systems just right for every child from the very youngest on up, our expandable instant systems can grow along with a child's increasing abilities and creativity. They really looked over the words they wanted to put in this pamphlet. I think the 2 sentences in this blurb here are fantastic. So that mindset or that mentality has sort of been lost to time about how Thomas Wooden Railway, nowadays it's like a very classic toy you play with your hands, and in the world of screens and iPads and all of that, playing with a physical toy is a bit strange, but these toys, they do develop your fine motor skills. They do help you socialize. They help you share. I always think back to that. I think it was a Wooden Railway commercial, all about the importance of trust and honesty. And, I think that mentality still reigns supreme, even with classic or modern Thomas Wooden Railway nowadays. They just don't outright say it like they do here. And I think that's maybe been lost. I would really honestly like Wooden Railway to kind of go back to this idea of these toys are very important to the development of your child. They help your child grow, and they help your child, pick up things and move things along the track, and almost like, actions and consequences, or, storytelling and imagination. Again, I think all of that, reigns true nowadays, even with the modern stuff, but they just don't outright say it. What's really interesting is they have this little blurb about being compatible with other wooden railway systems of the time. And that's a great point, because Thomas Wooden Railway was the new kid on the block at the time. And it is in such contrast to like 25 years later when Wood came out and they redid the track connections, and they were basically like, yeah, we're the premier wooden railway merchandise line out there, and you're going to abide by our new connections whether you like it or not. And that didn't last very long, because when Thomas Wooden Railway was reintroduced in 2022, they went back to the old track system. So it was kind of like an Apple moment, like Apple is just the king of smartphones. And so they've released a lot of proprietary connections and chargers and outlets and all this stuff. And I feel like Apple can get away with it somewhat. People still aren't happy about it. But, I was thinking, Fisher-Price at the time, when they redid Thomas Wooden Railway to Thomas Wood, they kind of had a very like Apple moment where they were like, yeah, we're in charge, we're the best, and we're going to change some things up, and you're going to like it. And people didn't like it. But look at the sets here. They don't have any fancy names. The names came later. They were just called Instant System with a number. So we have a circle here, a classic circle set. I always thought the circle set, yeah, it's important, but I don't know how effective this was at actually getting kids interested in Thomas Wooden Railway, just being honest. Like, it's simple, but it's almost too simple. Like, I think if I was given that as a kid, like, I'd probably have a little bit of fun and enjoyment out of it, but in terms of long-lasting play, like, I feel like you have to go something a little bit bigger here. For example, my first set was A Day at the Works, which is probably compatible or most comparable to maybe this set right here. So I don't ever know how effective circle sets. If anybody grew up with a circle set and had a bunch of fun and maybe, graduated to something bigger here, let me know. But I feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, parents maybe didn't want to spend this amount of money on a set, but then they get their kid this, and maybe their kid doesn't play with it because it's not interesting. And then it's like, well, I'm glad I didn't spend a lot of money on the bigger one because they're not a Thomas fan. Again, I'm like, well, I think if you give a kid anything like this, I mean, they're going to have to love it. But the second set here it's a circle set with a little bit more. We go from, let's see, 14 pieces over here to 22 pieces. Thomas is always included, Sir Topham Hatt and some workmen are included. But at least we get, a couple of switches. There's a special engine shed back there, and then I think they're breaking a very important cardinal sin. There's no buffer on that track back there. I don't really understand that. This is instant system number 3. We're up to 35 pieces. Toby and Henrietta are included. There's a couple more switches, more buildings. Again, we just kind of expand up until instant system number 4, which is a figure 8. Little pre-production prototype buffer there that looks a little bit different. But like I said, remember those marketing pictures with all of the kids? This is interesting because in later yearbooks, they're solely focused on the items. There's no like action shots or, living shots, lifestyle shots, I think is what they call them, of the kids playing with the toys. It's always just the products. And I think this is important because you're supposed to be able to play with these toys with other kids, and, you share, and, you create stories and adventures together, which I think is really, really great. This next page is more focused on accessories, and at the top it reads, "Now Learning Curve Toys introduces new accessories to expand the world of Thomas the Tank Engine for years of family fun." Again, pictures of people actually playing with the items, some parents included in this one. Then the subheading says, "Learning Curve Toys offers accessories inspired by favorite Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends adventures. Learning Curve's Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends wooden railway system enables children to bring these stories and their gentle themes of friendship, honesty, and responsibility into their playtimes. So much more than tracks and trains, our wooden railway system helps parents and children explore the questions and the wonders that come with growing up." Just mwah, great writing right there. And I think, it's true. Like, wooden railway is kind of an introduction to life. It's problem solving, it's creating stories, it's imagination, it's having fun. It is not, you can look at it at the surface level, it's just tracks and trains, but really it is more than that. And other toys do this really great, but almost as a graduate and a continuous lover of Thomas Wooden Railway, like I can definitely attest to the fact that, everything said in those paragraphs is true. But in terms of what's presented on this page, just a lot of accessories, signs, trees, buildings, figures. They were really going all out here, even though the lineup of actual engines was, I'd say, a little bit lacking. And I don't think this is designed to be like every engine at the time. This is just a highlight. Look at all of, the tracks you can buy, everything here. Prototype Thomas Comes to Breakfast. The risers always threw me off because, like I said, I reviewed this set. And the risers are different than they were a couple years later. They didn't have the grooves in the side. They had the stickers, which was some nice detailing. But yeah, when Thomas Wooden Railway was introduced, they did not have clickety-clack track yet. It was just plain Brio copy track. Even an item like the Archstone Bridge, which has been around for years, it is still very weird to look at that item without the clickety-clack track on it. So we move over to the back. It says, "The Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Wooden Railway System, well loved by children and parents and well crafted by Learning Curve Toys." Again, just some great verbiage there. We have some bigger destinations or pieces. The single stone tunnel always was interesting because, unlike in later versions, this version, the roof actually popped off, which was super interesting. They never really carried that over. Ellsbridge Station, Ellsbridge Platform, really great. And then we have like one picture of an item actually in the box. All the rest of these pictures were just, this is what they look like out of the box. But we actually do get to see the boxes that were first made. And what's interesting is that green was kind of the main color of the boxes at the time. I don't really usually think of green as a Thomas Wooden Railway color, but yeah, back when these toys were introduced, it was supposed to be like you were, in the countryside or something like that, puffing through a field. And then like beginning in like 1994, 95 onwards, really the major colors used were like blue, yellow, white, and maybe a little bit of brown there. But yeah, that's like the only picture we have of the actual merchandise. There's this little section. What's interesting is they call this the Island of Sodor playmat, which, there was even a section here about these felt playmats you could buy that I kind of skipped over. I actually have one of these playmats that came, I've had since I was a child, probably included with the Day at the Work set. But interestingly, they call this a playmat, so it's supposed to be felt. But the play table right here is the exact same design. Like there's that island with the windmill. See this red over here? That's that at the top there. So maybe there was a playmat version of this, but honestly, like I wonder if that's a typo. Maybe it's supposed to be the playboard. There's another playmat there, and then I mentioned this, what I thought used to be called the 100-piece set is like the 109-piece set with that playboard. You can buy the playboard by itself. It says sold separately. But yeah, I mean, this has just been a very fascinating look into like the very first year of the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Wooden Railway system, not the merchandise line, which is very interesting to me. It's so fun to look back through time. This is where it all began, and Learning Curve was a very small company that had just been formed, and if Thomas Wooden Railway hadn't been successful, I mean, the course of Thomas merchandise would have been so different over the years. But this is a great look at where the line started, but I'm happy that in later years, or in in the future years, we got something a little bit more substantial than just this pamphlet. The pamphlet's great, but even though I've spent a ton of time talking, I mean, it's just a very surface level look at all of the toys. Later yearbooks dive a lot deeper. They're more interactive. They're definitely meant for kids. This, I feel like, is more, it's almost like something you'd hand to a parent at like a department store or something. Think of like a Macy's or a Sears at the time where you could buy this stuff in person. This was, I think, more designed for parents. There's definitely some, as a kid, I would probably just like to look at the pictures over and over again. I wouldn't really take the time to read all of the fine print. But this has been a very fun look back in time at the origins of the Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise line. I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I have, and if you're able to, please leave some comments as to what you think about all of this or any other fun things you spotted. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully, I'll start to work my way through all of the different pamphlets and yearbooks we've seen over the years very slowly, and we'll kind of see how the Thomas Wooden Railway line has evolved over the years. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much, friends. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next video.